started. Thanks all. So we're gonna have a roundtable with Nate and Ignacio. They'll start by introducing themselves. They'll provide a brief introduction of their research agendas and the job market outcomes, followed by a bunch of questions from all of you, many of whom are on job market next year, presumably, about the job market process. So yeah, let's get started. Do you want to start with some introductions, provide a brief history of where you are, where you did your PhD, or what's your job market paper, job market field, and the outcomes, your job market outcomes, and which year you went on the job market? Yeah, Nate.
Yeah, I'm first. I'm Nate. I'm currently a sixth-year PhD student in economics at MIT, although soon I will no longer be a student anymore, I guess. So that's a life change. I'm an island environmental guy, so I do research that's sort of at the intersection of those two topics, thinking about basically how environmental markets can function or not function in certain cases. So I work on things like transportation markets and also EV adoption, and then my job market paper, which is on water, which we just heard a long talk about. It's on a different aspect of water, thinking about investment in the use of groundwater wells and thinking about how we can manage the overuse of aquifers. And that's it, I guess.
And where are you headed?
So I'm going to do a postdoc at Microsoft next year, and then I'll be an AP at work after
that.
Ignacio.
Great. So I'm Ignacio. I'm a sixth-year PhD student here at the LSE. My main field is environmental, but it's at the intersection of urban and development economics. So I focus my research agenda on environmental challenges faced by cities in low and middle income countries, and together with Yoshiki, who I think he just left, working on a couple of projects on sanitation and the provision of waste collection and disposal. Yoshiki will talk about sanitation later with you. We're doing a project on 19th century Paris, but my job market paper was on the market for trash collection and disposal in Accra, the capital of Ghana. And there we think about how the government can steer this informal provision of what we think as a public service to align with social goals and controlling waste pollution, because in Accra at the moment is an informal market for collection that serves most citizens, but then disposal occurs mostly at uncontrolled illegal dump sites rather than at the government waste transfer stations where waste pollution is controlled. So we model the market, we do surveys with household waste collectors and think about what type of feasible government regulation, from price regulation to the provision of infrastructure, might help steer the market to formal disposal. Yes, so in other research, we use more tools from urban economics to think about the long-run developments of the provision of sanitation infrastructure in Paris. And I'm going to Berkeley ARE as an AP next year.
Thanks for the introductions. I'll kick off. We'll open the floor to questions very soon. I'll just kick off with a couple of questions. I think the most important part of the job market process is the JMP, the job market paper. What's the story behind your JMP? How did it come together? We'll start with Ignacio this time.
Okay, so I was in Accra, in Ghana, working on a different project on electrification, and the gutters, the drains are open in the city, and they're always choked with trash. So first I thought that that was clearly a problem for the city, but there was no economics question yet. And then when I was there, we often waken up by the tricycle collectors that at 5 or 4 a.m. they have a small song that I'm not gonna repeat. They have a song, and they announce that they're in the neighborhood. So if you want your waste to be collected, you just go out and pay a small fee. And I thought it was very interesting that they had a market for trash collection. We started investigating the market, and then by doing surveys with the Bola taxis, they operate like a taxi, and Bola means waste. We realized that the market for collection was working quite well and outperforming the government services, but these Bola taxis predominantly dump the waste at big and controlled dump sites. So the economics 101 question was there. This is a market that is doing what markets do well, but the externality was displaced across the city without government intervention. And then we partnered with a couple of data collection companies with funding from the ITC, and then the project unfolded.
Right. That's great. You guys can ask follow-up questions if you have throughout. And Nate, what about you?
My origin story, I guess, is less exciting and interesting. I was in Cambridge in MIT, sitting in my office with Aaron, who's in the back there, as we often do. And we were actually working on a totally unrelated project about electric vehicle adoption. And our setting in that project is this market in Texas. And it turns out we needed, air pollution data for that project. The person who regulates air in Texas is the same person who regulates water. And so we started learning about this issue of aquifer depletion, which is also an issue in Texas. If you've ever seen my document paper, which probably most of you have not, but it was at LSE, so some of you maybe saw it, ended up in a totally different setting, which is an aquifer in Kansas. And the way that happened is that we were interested in this question about aquifer depletion, how it interacts with long run investment. And we couldn't get the right data for it in Texas, but we were able to get it in this other setting of Kansas. So we ended up getting introduced in one area, thinking about the sort of economics of this problem, and then sort of picking our key empirical setting, although it turns out you just don't have that much choice where the economics and the data are going to intersect. And that's sort of how it began.
I see. And what was the timeline from the idea being generated to your job market or to the execution?
So I think we started thinking about this project in, I want to say, our third year somewhere. We didn't end up getting the right data for it until somewhere in my fifth year. So it's like a little bit, when you start counting.
I see.
Around the same time, the initial idea, which was completely different, it was on the third year, and then we started collecting data from households, and then throughout 2 years, we did all of the surveys, and at the end, we tried to implement the field experiment, which happened right before the job market. So over 3 years, we ran all the surveys.
Right. Any questions at this stage?
Yeah, not a recommended strategy exactly. Earlier is better. I mean, actually, I'll just say one thing, which is that one of the best investments I think you can make during your PhD is investing in data. It's working on a product comes a huge opportunity cost of your own time, but getting data sometimes, if it's buying it, is free. And so to the extent that you can just invest in data in that way, that's kind of huge returns down the line.
Right. So what was the data constraint that you were facing, which you had to overcome?
So for us, the data was that we really needed historical data. So because we're interested in this long run investment, a lot of these investments were made in the mid 20th century. So our context was the US. Even in the US, the data collection for agricultural land in the mid 20th century was relatively poor. So to find a data set that extended that far back with high coverage and high quality was really challenging for us. And there ended up being really only one place we could do that.
And how did you do it? What was the story there? Were you able to overcome that barrier?
I think actually, the breakthrough for us was talking with a lot of people sort of on the ground who knew the data landscape better than us. So in particular, shout out to this guy, Aaron Hrosnik at the USGA, who's an expert in water use data. So if you ever want to work on water issues in the US, he's the guy to talk to. And he led us to some of the people at the water rights sort of organization within Kansas, who then were able to give us access to the data.
I see. What about you? What are your normative feelings about your job market?
In terms of data, in our case, there was no data.
Yeah.
The market is informal, so there was some census statistics on the sort of households that were
this is the caveat to what I said earlier. You have to make the data; it's not free.
So we just have to go and collect it. But that was surprising. That was something that as PhD students we could undertake with a couple of grants from ITC. So that's also, I think, exciting and optimistic that even in a setting where there was no data, the market is informal, the downsides are illegal, we were able to, with two very proficient data collection companies, but we were able to gather enough information to estimate what households are doing, what the collectors are doing, the downside operators are doing.
Right. And what sort of institutional advantages you had at MIT and LSE, which facilitated the process of bringing your paper together? So let's start with that.
Well, I mean, I think the first one that I can think of is that we had easy access to money to buy data. So there were certain amounts of data we needed that, all we had to do was ask for those resources, and we were able to get them. So that's definitely one thing. And then the second thing that I sort of really relied on and thought was really useful, and available in some places, but not all the places, is just that the attention of my advisors and getting lots of feedback, very constant feedback from them was hugely valuable. So a little bit comes down to your own personal relationship with working and also with your advisors and how you like to work. But for me, that worked out really well, I think.
Yeah, and we benefited greatly from having the IGC. The project also emerged from conversations with the Ghana country economists from the IGC, and we spent a lot of time talking to people there. So that was great.
Could you, so many of them here are not
That's
LSEs.
a follow-up question because I know now you have been to go to Accra for many times. At the beginning of the year, I met you. Every summer you went to Accra, and at which moment you feel like this is your job activity, you're going to really pin down the research question. The first, I assume the first very few visits you are exploring the data, what kind of setting you have, what's the institution background, and then at what moment you feel like this is an interesting question, I can formalize it as a job paper, I can use it as my job.
I don't know if this is the best strategy, but I said when I said this has to be my job market paper, and then the question. So because also the question really happened as we were understanding the data and collecting the data. At first, it was just focused on how households make their waste disposal choices. And we were thinking of the zero waste that remains uncollected, and some households burn and dump their trash. And then we actually observed that the rate of households that were willing to pay was very high. And then when we surveyed, we tried to identify where these tricycle collectors were going. We identified the big dump sites where they go for disposal, and then we map all their flows, and we saw that. And then we documented the difference in prices in the illegal sector and the formal sector. And then the question kind of emerged as we were collecting the data. So this has to be my market paper. Let's understand this market as much as we can. But then the final question emerged later.
Guy, there's a question. Yeah.
To what extent are your decisions of what to include in the paper driven by that you want to show what your toolkit is, and what is interesting for the research question?
I guess I can talk a little bit. I mean, so my perspective coming from structural IO. So I think in structural IO, you can either be a methods person a little bit, or you can be an applications person. If you can be a methods person, you can think about that a little bit more. I think you might want to think about, adding the bells and whistles to your toolkit and showing off a little bit in that respect. And then, you want to have the cleanest possible empirical setting to go along with that. But if you're an applications person, I think a little bit you want to take the opposite perspective. You want to think about what's important to the economics of my question and how can I strip down the model as much as possible and still answer the interesting economics. And if you just want to throw in dynamics on top of that, you're just going to make your paper confusing and you're going to make the question harder and you're not going to get the clear answer that you really want.
I have a sort of different questions, which is like, when you first talk to people about the idea that you ended up working with, did you get kind of like pushback? Then did you have some sort of commitment to be like, okay, maybe like this was sort of not the reaction that you wanted and you kept on working on it anyways? Or was it like all positive and rosy from the start? And,
you can take this first.
It wasn't rosy, but I guess like the main reaction was, we'll go for it because there's not much done in terms of waste, and the economics of waste management are unclear. So go for it and see if you can find an economics question that people outside of a niche field like. And I think that was the main challenge, to use waste to think about regulation and state capacity and the provision of public services in cities. Which I think is much broader than just waste collection and disposal. This is about how can governments deal with congestion externalities in cities when the capacity to fund public services is limited, when the capacity to implement taxation or ban polluting behaviors is also limited. So how can cities deal with these challenges in settings like Accra? And waste is just an example. Yes, but one set of question better. Didn't get too much feedback on a positive or negative direction, and at the end, when the question was much clearer, most of the feedback was positive. I never got pushback in terms of don't do this, it's either too risky or there's not a clear question.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I agree with the last part of that in the sense that, I didn't get feedback of the you should kill this project dimension, but nor was the feedback like monotonically increasing, nor was it always positive. I mean, first of all, there's like huge within-person fixed effects, at least that I noticed with my advisors, where you ask them 1 week and they say, it's an amazing idea, Nate, you're so smart. And then you ask them the next week, they say, what is this? And, at least in our project, we were interested initially in multiple dimensions of the question. right? So you have a key issue you're interested in, but there's a lot of economics that are going on. And we ended up with one economic question in the end that was interesting out of like the hundreds that we started with. And so a little bit, if you can be flexible in that way, that's useful. Now, you can also go the other way, and that makes things a little bit easier from the start, where you have this really clear question in mind. That makes it really easy to kill the project if it's not going well. But sometimes you think, you have an intuition that there's something there. And unlike your advisors, you spend a lot of time thinking about the question and working on it, or whoever's giving you feedback. So you should trust those instincts a little bit. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah.
Let's do a bunch of job market paper related questions, then we can move more towards the process and during the job market stuff. Any questions on the job market paper? So both of you have co-authored job market papers. How did you approach that decision? Were you given advice against or in favor of co-authoring?
I give no advice either in favor or against. It happened very naturally. We started working on something that very clearly emerged from my experience there. So from the beginning, it was implicit that it was going to be my job market paper, but then eventually you have to have that conversation. And through that project, we also wanted to explore something that was much more related to Yosiki's interest, and that clearly was going to be his job market paper. So we could do two job market papers at the same time that worked quite well and matched our interests. So definitely it has to be a good conversation. But for us, it happened very, very organically, and no one told us that we shouldn't be doing that or anything like that.
Yeah, I think my answer is probably similar. I mean, I guess to some extent we weren't even thinking about it at all, in the sense that you just want to write papers, and the field now expects not just one big job market paper, although they still expect that, but also other papers. So I think it hurts you to think about like very strategically in some sense, like, oh, I want this to be my solo author job market paper. Like it's much better to develop a research agenda and work with people you enjoy working with and just like enjoy the process to some extent. Now, if I was going to be super strategic, the one thing I would say that I've noticed is that it can be useful if you're a younger student, which maybe is too late for some of us here, to work with someone who's a year or two older than you and learn from them and from their experience what the market is like a year or two earlier. But that's like, optimizing on sort of the margin, I guess.
Right.
Not directly related to job market paper, but you were talking about research agenda. Like, how tightly knit do you think that this research agenda need to be in one direction, or can you like pick topics from, I don't know, you have something on resources, then you do something on energy, then you do something on something else? Like, is that a problem or not so much?
I don't know that it's a problem necessarily. I mean, I think the thing that you want to think about is my research agenda is what I'm going to work on in the next 5 or 6 years as I'm a junior person, right? But hopefully, getting tenure at the end of that. So that's what if you're thinking about how is my past work going to influence my future work, that's sort of like your research agenda. And it's totally okay if you've worked on 10 different topics and then, maybe ex post there emerges a common thread between them, or maybe you just have a couple of different threads in your research agenda. But what you want to think about is, what am I going to be working on in the future, not just like what I did. So your research agenda is not exactly like what your portfolio is, it's what you like want to be doing. And the only reason that matters is you do get a little bit get put into like a box of like who you are, and it's based on basically what you say about your research agenda. I don't know if that was your experience.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I also kind of have two blocks that I try to link in my research statement in a grandiose way, but really are two differentiated blocks. One on energy and one on cities in low-income countries. So I think that was perfectly. And in the future, who knows? The ideas that I'm having now are maybe not on the same path, but I think I shouldn't just stop myself.
Right. So what share of feedback about your job market paper came from your advisors, your friends, conferences, internal, external presentations?
Your office. How good is office?
Your
How
Pure effects.
Great office.
Yeah. Okay.
I didn't do too many conferences before the job market, mostly because my paper wasn't ready. I did one right before the Cure conference on urban economics here, which was very, very useful, but the job market was already very, very polished. So I got useful feedback there. I got 2 discussions, and that was great. I think chatting to peers is also very useful. I would say that a higher share I would attribute it to peers, but still the advisors at the very end were very useful. I don't know.
I see. And what's the normative? So what do you think should be the normative share of different aspects? Conferences, peers, advisors?
I don't know. I really don't know. I benefited equally from the three of them.
I see. Nate, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends a lot on your like individual relationships with your peers and your advisors. And I guess my experience was that during the process of writing and working on the paper and a lot of the actual work that went into it, almost all the feedback was coming from my peers and people in my office and so on and so on. And then actually during the market, a lot of the feedback was from my advisors. And not that, the type of feedback that can be really useful from them is how to pitch the paper, who might have what type of question or criticism that you can think about addressing in advance, like these sort of more practical type of questions. And then also like zooming out a little bit to the bigger picture of how this connects to like who you are as a researcher and things like that. But like the sort of nuts and bolts, maybe it's less useful.
I see. And what about conferences and stuff? Internal presentations and external presentations?
Yeah, I guess my personal experience was that, internal and external presentations, I never found to be like the feedback to be super useful in the sense that, I think I put the onus on myself in the sense that it's really hard to give a presentation where it's a work in progress. You don't have the whole story and pitch together, so you don't really know where you need the right feedback. It's hard for people to target their feedback to like your sort of work in progress. But it's super useful as like a commitment device. So if you want a commitment device, like come to LSE Environment Camp next year and present. That's super useful for like encouraging you to work really hard, get something right.
Fair enough. Questions? Yes, Mitch.
You said before, people don't put you in boxes as you go into the job market through that process. Did you like lean into the environment box, and how do you think that served you if you did?
I guess. Sorry,
What boxes are you in?
I will give you the strategic part of this advice, which is that, and something I totally did not understand before the market, which is that in order to get hired somewhere, you need a set of people who are willing to advocate for you in the hiring meeting. This is like totally in the nuts and bolts. So it's like, don't really worry about this too much. Like first order things is write the job market paper. Second order, like fifth order things is what I'm talking about, I guess. But you really want to have a field that you're connected with, is what I mean by a box. And so for me, that was always obvious. Like I had done all my PhD work in IO, all my advisors were IO, except for I have an environment advisor, Ben Olkin. That part was easy, and all my applications were environment. So it was like sort of a natural fit. I know for some people, more complicated, you're working across many fields. And the sort of key thing, I think, is just to make sure that there's at least one field that you can really speak to as a home, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, during the flyers, you see who's the box.
That's true.
So in my case, but something surprising in my case, there were sometimes clearly environment people and social development people, and surprisingly, sometimes IO people or urban people. So really, I think you can then cater to more than one of these boxes. But it's true that I guess for the first step, it's good, and your advisors will try to pitch you as environment or as development within one of the applications.
Yeah, I guess the thing I'll add to that is that this is like one question that your advisors are really super helpful for. It's like they can help you navigate this question. It's a little bit you want to think about not only, you want to think about who you want to be as a researcher and how that connects to your research that you've already done. But it's going to be a coordinated decision, and not just for strategic reasons, right? You also want to think about what you want to work on, because you're going to end up, this is sort of one of the nice things about the market is it's kind of an introduction to the profession, and like you will never interact with many of these people again for many years, and this is like all they'll know about you for a long time. And so you want them to remember that you are working on X, Y, or Z, then like that's the thing that you should sort of put the box you should put yourself in.
Right. I see. Any questions on the GMPs? Otherwise, we can move on to other aspects of the job market. Okay. Then let's move on to the other thing. So what is the importance of a research agenda in the job market, and what's the importance of having multiple projects, and how did you sort of come about to having them?
It is important because not in the online interviews, but during the one-on-one meetings that you have with faculty members, they always ask you about your broader agenda or projects. So it's definitely important to have it. I didn't know this until probably too late, but also I didn't worry about it, and then it was fine. So definitely important. The most important thing is your job market paper. Most of the questions revolve around your job market paper, but you should also present what you would want to do in the future or discuss other papers, because they're going to see your paper in the main presentation. So they often want to talk about other work.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I don't think you need to have like a huge research agenda with like a 10-year roadmap of what all your papers are gonna look like in some sense. But what is important is to like sort of know who you are as a researcher and have things you're excited about working on for the future. Like the one thing I would say to avoid is to say, wow, I've had my one big idea, it was this paper, and that's all I'm gonna come up with for the next 10 years. You might feel that way in some sense, or like you might like, oh, this was like so hard already. Like, how am I gonna do it again and again to write many more papers? And the answer is that I think it gets easier with experience, hopefully. And so, it can be some, big like ideas that you've had that, you don't necessarily have the data, or you have the data, but you don't quite have that question. Like, one of the things that's really exciting about the market is that you just get to talk a lot of economics with a ton of people, and people are really excited to talk to you, and you can generate a lot of ideas and get like big picture perspectives. I mean, like, as amazing as all my advisors and the people at MIT were, like, you learn that it's a really small like set of feedback and correlated questions and ideas, and so like you'll just like generate natural things just talking to people on the market.
Any questions on the process of job market? I have some other questions. Yeah, Paul.
I'm interested in like your coping strategy. Like during I mean it in like not in such a negative way, but like during the year up to the market, and like during all through, like who did you go to and talk to when you like really just needed to talk? Like what did you do to just like keep the temperature down and like stay cool, and like what were I don't know, I just feel like it's kind of interesting. Maybe you just had like different stuff.
It's a really good question that I don't have a great answer to. I would say, like, I mean, one thing that helped for me is having people outside of economics that I could talk to. For me, that was my partner. And then I'm also the type of person that likes sort of debriefing with people. So I enjoy talking with people on the market in my cohort as well. They would have information, or they would have, you're experiencing the same stress as all these people. So you can really lean on the people in your cohort. Now, I know there are some people who never wanted to talk about the market while they're in it. So I think it's important to figure out which type of person you are, and who, which other people around you are of which type. And then you can sort of self-select into each group. And then, the other thing is that, like, when you're in all of your flyouts, you're doing a ton of travel, so post interviews and all that, it's really hard to keep like a normal routine. So you're sort of feeling interrupted all the time. So the extent that you have anything you can do that like sort of feels natural and normal, for me, that was like sports. So I would always, every city I would go to, I'd find like the local climbing gym and climb there the night before, the night after my flyout. That really helped me like just get in the mindset of, oh, this is still just sort of, I'm living my life. Because the market it's a long time. So you don't want to just work the whole time. You want to still live your life a little bit.
Right.
Yeah, so for me, during the year before the job market, it was salsa dancing. Also, my wife was very supportive throughout, and I think it worked out really well to have a co-author in the job market paper that was not on the market, so I could just settle the concerns, and also to have someone at the office sitting side by side that was on the market and happy to talk about how it's going. And both of us were relatively relaxed early on, and we got stressed around the same time. So that worked out really nicely. Yes, so I think that was great. I think during the flyouts, I didn't do much. I couldn't just traveling from one place to another and then just reading a little bit to clear the head, and that's it. So that was painful, but yeah, I think that's.
Okay.
Supporting.
Yeah. Another question. So you took on a research role at the industry at Microsoft, right? Or for 1 year?
Mm-hmm.
How open were you in the beginning to go into industry or international? Or for you, I think it's more international organizations. So when you were entering the job market.
So I guess my answer to this is that I was open to anything, and I think that's for me, that was the optimal strategy. I mean, this market, we like had basically no idea what it was going to look like, and so I think that was definitely ex ante optimal. And the thing that I guess is useful about this one is that it's much like getting a first offer was like the biggest stress release of the whole market, because you're like, okay, I'm not going to be unemployed next year or like in scrambling to find anything. And so like the private market is the easiest way to do that, because the academic market doesn't clear until like February at the very earliest for the most part. And so you're going to be waiting a long time for that. So to the extent that you can have private market offers that you're happy with, that's like a very useful option. Now, the challenge with that is navigating the timelines of multiple types of markets. At least for me, that was the biggest challenge. The industry markets are clearing fast. They want you to say yes or no. And the academic market doesn't care if you have an industry offer that has a timeline, exploding deadline, whatever. And also your advisors can't help you either because they don't know anybody. So, it's really hard to navigate those timelines, but like it's useful if you can do it. And they offer like different bundles of things, right? Like, you're sort of told you can only have preferences over like vertical rankings of positions, and I don't think, at least I did not want to have those types of preferences, and I don't think people should. Jobs have horizontal attributes. There's a lot more basically within across sector heterogeneity, within sector heterogeneity than I would have thought. Like, it's not like you have lexicographic preferences where you want all academic jobs and then all industry jobs. You're going to have all kinds of variation to that. So it's definitely, consider everything.
It's such an IO answer.
It is, you're right, but
I was open to anything at the beginning, but then as the market started happening, I was a little bit overwhelmed. So I focused on academic jobs, and I applied to a couple international organizations, and that's it. So I never did the work of really, truly spending time working on applications that would clear earlier. So, but originally I was open to anything, and I didn't apply to private sector.
Yeah, the thing I'll add about the private sector actually is that preparing for academic job interviews is much more difficult than private sector job market interviews, and like the skills translate a lot. The additional costs of doing that turns out to be relatively low, I think, which is why I didn't mind. You do have to submit the applications and stuff and do a little bit of outreach, but it's much better to do it simultaneously, I think, than to wait until after you learn like the outcomes of the academic market in some sense, even if it feels like, I guess, overwhelming. Unless you're like really certain about what you want. Because like another thing that surprised me about the market is how much I learned about my own preferences and how different they were from my ex-ante preferences. And so, like even things I would have said I would not have enjoyed or what would have enjoyed beforehand, it was useful to like keep the option set as open as possible.
Sorry, adding on, you were not targeting industry at all from the beginning. So you were not, it was not something that you had in mind when you were doing IO.
Is it a question for me?
Yeah.
Oh no, I would say I was targeting both. And like what does targeting mean is just like submitting applications to both, right? Yeah. But I didn't do like an internship or something. That would have helped. If you're interested in industry jobs, by the way, it does definitely help. It just as a pure signaling device to do an internship of some kind. I think it's a low, again, maybe too late for all of us here, but like if you're in your third year, for example, and you do an internship after that summer, and then even if you think you might be interested in industry jobs, otherwise they tend not to take you seriously, essentially.
So there's a question here, then we'll come to Pat.
Could you give examples of how your ex-ante and ex-post preferences change throughout the job market?
I won't give specific examples, but what I'll say is that you do a lot of learning about like the culture of particular departments. That's really hard to figure out like beforehand. And that really happens at the flyout stage. So a lot about flyouts is really about matching. So when you show up and you meet everybody and you learn, am I going to fit in here? Is this going to be a place where I'm happy and do good research for the next years? And that's also true of the private market as well, was my experience.
Just out of curiosity, in terms of the amount of institutions of like places you targeted, is it like in the hundreds, 200s, 300s, or was it just the 50 biggest ones and then we got a day in
around 200s?
200. Yeah. Okay, I would say I had 100 applications I sent out, which I tracked in a spreadsheet, which I highly encourage all of you to do. It's like gets really overwhelming. I was in the end limited basically by the supply of available or demand of available like job postings essentially. I mean, I have two body problems. It was a set of places we could go to. Yeah, my advice on this front is to apply everywhere. Like there's really low cost, the additional click that it takes us to apply. And so anywhere you think you might even possibly want to go to.
Yeah, but
Yes, just a quick follow-up. Did you like use ChatGPT to write your motivation letter differently, or just have one and just send it to everyone the same one?
I feel like we were like a little bit early for it. It was like AI was not quite, even last year, it was not working quite as well as it does now. So no, I didn't, and I don't think you should.
Did you have like one motivation letter you sent to all, or like you have specific ones to the ones?
I had one that I sent it for.
Yeah, I had one cover letter. I changed a couple of things, and that's it.
Yeah,
But
I had
through-
like a Melmer.
thanks to Flo.
situation.
Yeah.
Takes a bit.
right.
I guess during your conversation with faculty members during the buyout, especially with people not in your field, like, what are you talking about for 30 minutes?
A lot. Anything. I mean, the one-on-ones, so the advice I got, which I turned out to be right and was really grateful for, was that like if you go in with the attitude that you're just talking with an economist and having fun for 30 minutes, it's gonna be amazing. And 99% of that will be like that, and then 1% will be horrible and like tooth pulling. You know, what are you talking about is your research, their research, you know, so you can have questions about the department that you might want them to answer, ask. They might have questions if it's, especially if it's after your talk, they might have questions about the talk they'll ask you. And if you're really floundering, you can like look at their bookshelf and see what they're interested in, and then try and ask a question about that, which I only had to pull out once or twice, thankfully. But yeah, it's like something that felt intimidating the first few flyouts, at least for me. But you like very quickly get into sort of a groove of it and like get used to it.
Yeah. And it's actually fun. Like those conversations are great. At MIT, I chatted with people about movies, for example.
You ask about life in the city or something, right?
Yeah.
I mean, those people are kind of like your allies. They're like people who want to meet you in the department, and then sometimes the secret enemies emerge in the seminar.
Some of them are very nice on the one-on-one, and then
We skipped a step, right? So obviously there's a job market paper, but then department provides a lot of support in the lead up to the job market. What sort of support do you think was provided? What sort of support is missing that, in future we can ask our departments to provide?
So here, I think Matthias did
Yeah.
quite well very early on. We had a mock presentation just with him and a few students. That was great, and it was very, very early on, before the
Yeah.
mock presentation that we have in front of the whole department. And then beyond that, they also paired us with faculty members outside of our own field to practice the online interviews. And I think we had 3 of these. So by the time you finish, you more or less know your spiel already. And that worked quite well. And then, of course, Matthias sends us a bunch of information. But I think those 2 very early on were very, very nice.
Yeah, I mean, I think the things that you really want as the practice, so if your department doesn't offer them, you should try and get them to do it, or to get your peers together to do it, is a mock presentation. You want as many practice interviews as possible, and you can ask older students who have now become junior faculty to do that for you. You can ask faculty to do that for you. They'll mostly be willing to do that, hopefully. Or your peers are going to be not quite as able to do this for you, but you can try and like help each other prepare questions. And the way you should think about the interview is just that, you're going to get a set of questions that's going to repeat the whole market, and the interview is where you can collect all those questions and figure out the answers to them. And hopefully you've already figured out the answers. And if you haven't, sit down and think about it before the next interview. And then the one thing I would say that actually I did not feel well prepared for is the timeline. So if you're going to go on the economics academic market, there's a particular timeline, and at least at MIT, a lot of the advice is tailored to that timeline. Especially for environmental people, you might be interested in environmental schools, policy schools, business schools that operate on totally different timelines, and so you just should be ready for it. And like the earliest timelines are usually business schools, and they start in September. So if you are thinking you're interested in a business school, especially like marketing, other types of departments like that, you're going to want to be ready in September, and you might start getting, interviews from those places way earlier than you expected if you're not sort of ready for that.
And you're going to what?
I'm going to a business school in the end. So, but Wharton operates on like the same economics timeline. I mean, I had an initial couple of interviews at business schools that I just was not ready for, because I was like, oh, interviews don't start till November after Thanksgiving, and that was not not the case. And you know, if you want business school interview advice specifically, you can chat with me afterwards. I'm happy to talk about it.
Did you have a question? Oh, yeah, go ahead.
You mentioned about the food audit, like, do you mention it to the committee when you're applying, or?
No. Yeah, I would say no. Sorry, by your committee, my advisors and I talked extensively about it, and I would encourage that because they can express those preferences privately in a way that, like, yeah, you otherwise are not able to, and it can be useful sometimes. But the only other way to think about it is through like if you're going to apply to American universities, the AA signals, which don't really work all that well. Yeah, so otherwise you basically can't.
Did you guys signal to the places you ended up going, getting offers?
Yep. Did you really? Yeah. You're the first successful case I've ever heard of. That's amazing. No, the answer is no. The way you should think about the signals is that you don't want to signal somewhere that everyone wants to be, I guess. You know, it's like not useful. You want to have informative content. So places that you're idiosyncratically interested in are good places to signal. So for me, that was like a location that my partner and I really wanted to be in. That would be good for both of us. That was the place I signaled, but yeah, it didn't work out.
Other questions? Any questions on the job market?
I have a question because as the market is closed, I realize that there is always like one more robustness check, one more something to add to the model. And so I wanted to ask for you, what is the relative weight that you need to put in the last month to that versus like presentation, the pitch?
I don't know. My experience was weird because by the time that I was preparing the mock presentations, I was also adding the results of one field experiment that we ran. So I think it's a little bit of a weird scenario. And I had already submitted some applications before I added that. I think at the end you work until the very end. But yeah, the line is not very clear, but at a certain point it's quite clear that you should start preparing for your spills. You should start already with some mock presentations. So the department tends to give a timeline of what you should be doing at each stage. I was working on my job market paper until the very end, but I think that's unusual.
Yeah, I'm actually not sure that it's unusual. I think at least from what I've seen, pretty common. And you basically the answer is you're going to be doing all of the things all the time up until interviews start. And when interviews start, like that's when things are sort of locked in some sense. Like if you want to think about how to triage, because you're going to have to triage, you can't do everything. Before the interviews start, no one's going to read anything but the introduction of your paper. So what you want to have really polished is the introduction and the pitch and the core idea of the paper. And it's okay if you're still filling out Appendix G at that time. When you get to the flyout, Appendix G needs to be done or close to done, although I was still editing Appendix G in between some flyouts. So not a recommended strategy, but it's something you can do. And like, you have the time to prepare in between these stages in some sense. So like for the interview, you need the pitch and everything that's going to be ready for that. And then when you come to the flyout, you need the talk to be ready, but the paper can still be working a little bit in some sense, like in just the details. And then by the time you're actually at the flyout, you want it to be ready.
Yeah, I didn't work on my paper since the interview started. Basically,
that's the optimal thing.
Yeah, I could.
Other questions?
When did you lock in your title? Trading trash on Tricycle.
It was way better. It was very clear when the title was there. Yeah, I didn't. Some people were saying you should change it. It's a little bit too quirky. No, it was I think I looked in very good.
Other questions? What, in hindsight, what are some of the things you would have done differently on the job market?
How can we learn from your mistakes?
What are the mistakes, and then how do we look? In grave detail.
Yeah, I can answer a little bit of this, which is like, I think one thing I underestimated was like the pure chaos in some sense, and in a purely logistical sense. So I tried to be as organized as possible, but like things come up that you just don't expect, and you should try and be ready for them. For example, like one of my interviews almost got ruined because I got like locked out of the department. I had no way in. I couldn't, so I was taking this interview from like a random location. And like just to be ready for things like something like that's gonna come up. Or your flight, one of my flights before my flight, it was delayed. So I didn't get there till like 4 a.m. and then you have to do your flight out the next day. And these things are just gonna happen. You should just be ready for it. I think it would help to know in advance that that stuff is gonna happen. Maybe, hopefully it doesn't happen to you, but it might.
I mean, my case, I felt that I wasn't ready soon enough. Like I saw some peers that were ready much earlier, and they were already presenting at conferences, and I feel like I worked until the very end. Even since the interview started, I didn't do anything, so I would have planned ahead a little bit better. In terms of field work, there's so many administrative steps that can slow you down. Just getting a contract ready by the LSE is a 6 months endeavor. So those things are really hard to plan and may slow down. It didn't do it catastrophically, but it was a little bit more painful. So anything fieldwork related, it has those risks, but beyond that.
Yeah, and I guess one thing that I would add to this is start writing the paper as early as possible. It can be hard, if your field experiment is still in progress, to think, okay, I can't do anything and I'm just waiting and you have to work to the last minute. But there's a lot of things you can do in advance to be ready for that, in some sense. So I wish I would have started writing, purely the writing. Maybe that's just done now. Maybe Claude and AI have fixed all of this, but yeah, it just feels better mentally to know that you have all the scaffolding ready. You just need to plug in the table, essentially.
Eddie, you get the last question.
I think this is always the question we end up asking, which is if you're writing a job market paper now, what would you write it on? Wherever you want to go, you know the drill.
Surely, I would say my own. I couldn't imagine having a different job market paper.
And it's too early to think about.
19th century Paris sewer development.
Exactly. Yeah, I guess you're all Enviro people. There's never been a better time to be an Enviro person. It's a huge and growing field. And everyone's excited for environment. So yeah, you made the right choice in some sense.
Great, that was our time. Thank you all. Logistics, presenters. There's the dinner at High Hall Bone, Colonel Saab High Hall Bone at 7:30. I want to see you all there. And and you guys are also going to join, right? So you can ask them more questions. You can bug them with the kind of questions that you don't want recorded. I should mention now that
this was recorded.
Yeah, so